life is a team game. Everyone has a role to play, and everyone has to play their role properly. What you then need is, the people skills to make it all come together. The very first game I did was the Springboks against the All Blacks at Ellis Park in the year 2000. You need a vast majority of those people to actually come together long enough, for that result to come through. It's a South African thing. It's not necessarily just the rugby thing. We play to prove people wrong, as opposed to we play to prove ourselves right. Players don't trust written media enough. There's always that feeling like, yes, I said it, but that's not how I meant it. A journalist's job is to contextualize things. Why is he talking like that? Where is it coming from? Our job is to give that context. So if you open your doors wide to transformation, it goes to follow then that you're going to get more and more people. I mean, it's going to be an interesting ride to watch, because I don't think we've had a talent like that ever before.
Can I quote you on that? Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode on the Lessons from the Game podcast. And today I am joined by a man whose byline has appeared in the Sunday Times, City Press, SA Rugby Magazine, News 24. Sim is a veteran sports writer who has been bringing South African rugby stories to life for over 20 years. He's followed the Springboks through world titles, transformation milestones, and controversies, while diving into his unique perspective on the evolution of rugby. And he'll also share what it really takes to be on the reporting side of the game. And he will definitely be giving some insights on some of the stories he covered on my career back in the good and the bad. But anyway, Sim, brother, good to have you. Thanks for joining me.
No, thanks for having me, Gurthro. Yeah, I must admit, when I was writing about you, I never thought you'd be interviewing me. I mean, that's the massive turn of events.
Oh,
also, it probably shows just how long I've kind of hung around, almost like a bad smell in the industry. Yeah, I'm still you
still look the same, man. You still look the same. Oh man, honestly, if I think about it now, I never saw this day coming. If I think about you standing there at Loftus Versfeld B Field with your little black book, waiting for a quote, a note, and trying to, Sim, leave me alone, man. I need to get to training. But yeah, brother, it's great. It's great to have you. We've been on a few pods before and chatted about, and always respected the hell out of you. Even though I've been on the receiving side of some of your articles, but you've also shared the truth as well and written some great articles about me in the past as well. Actually, recently came across an article you wrote just after the 2007 World Cup final. And I went deep. But it's great. The reason I wanted you to come on the spot, because we're all passionate about the game of rugby. This podcast is about the lessons that we have learned. And I also wanted to highlight the role that the media and journalists also play in the game of rugby. It's important because sometimes you guys get crucified a lot. I'm not sure who's the biggest villain in the game. Is it the referee? Is it the media? Who is it? But Sam, I just want to say, first and foremost, thanks for all our unbelievable discussions we've had in the past. It's always been great, all those little catch-ups in the hotel corridors and also on the B field at Loftus Versfeld. But I want to start off this pod. As a journalist, sports journalist who's been in the game now, we just mentioned, 25 years. Wow, you're old, but you haven't changed. You still look the same. We're going to get into that a bit later. How did you do that? What's your secret? What is the one lesson from the game that you have learned that you can share with our audience who are listeners, who want to strive in the game of rugby, young rugby players, but also coaches that want to turn this potentially into a career?
Look, I mean, I think if I were to talk about a lesson that I've picked up from the game, it's that life is a team game, and that everything is a people business. Everything you go through in life is a people business. So your people skills are going to come in handy. It doesn't matter how you want. I know we sort of smack bang in the middle of AIing everything, And actually, I think the more we understand that, everything is a people business, then, the better we are. So what I mean when I say life is a team business, you look at a rugby team, you are a prop. Um, there are 15 of you at any given time, or 30 guys on, 30 guys on a field, excluding the ref, which is basically 31 guys. And each of those people has a role to play. And you need enough. You probably don't need all sort of 15 or 30 to do their jobs well enough to guarantee a result. But you need a vast majority of those people to actually come together enough, long enough, for that result to come through. So for me, that's kind of like, the massive lesson I picked up from the game, which is, it's like almost something I take with me all the time, which is everything is like life is a team game. Everyone has a role to play, and everyone has to play their role properly. And then, you kind of like, then obviously, for all those roles to be seamlessly executed, what you then need is, the people skills to make it all come together. And that's why then I say, life's a team game. And then over and above that, everything is a people business.
No, awesome. That's been, I love it. Life is a team game. Can I quote you on that? Can I be quoting a journalist on that? Life is a team game. I love that. Okay, awesome.
Probably stole from somebody else as well,
Today's Lessons from the Game episode was possible thanks to the support of Harris Begley Financial Planning, headed up by former Blackheath player Matt Begley. They are the experts to speak to for tailored advice on investments, mortgages, insurance, and pensions, helping you plan for a future of financial security. So when you think money, think Harris Begley and head to www.harrisbegley.co.uk. Approver Quilter Financial Services Limited and Quilter Mortgage Planning Limited, March 2025.
All right, I love that quote. Life is a team game because, you can't do it alone. And you're talking about life is a team game. Rugby players, we tend to put ourselves on this pedestal. People put us on this pedestal, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. Sam, you have covered rugby for more than 2 decades. All right, you've seen some great things and you've seen some ugly things as well. But, everybody's now on this bandwagon. South Africa is the power nation at the moment. They've gone up back-to-back World Cups. But it wasn't always the case. It wasn't always the case. I remember you actually wrote the article, you correct me, when it was in 2021, I think. Springboks need to get rid of this underdog mindset. If you can talk to us about the bit of the evolution of South African rugby through your eyes. All right. What were the main things that we used to struggle with? And what are the things that changed that allow us to become this dominant team over the last few years?
Yeah, geez. That's, it sounds like a simple question, but it's actually, obviously encompasses almost entirely my entire career. So the very first game I did was the Springboks against the All Blacks at Ellis Park in the year 2000. And that was the game, I think the Boks won at 46 something, like 46-40 or something insane like that. Jonah Lomu was still playing. I think he was up against Chester Williams that day. So anyway, that was like my very first rugby, test match was that game, and the Boks won. And I remember sort of like about 3 or 4 matches into my career, the Boks had never lost. And, I started to think I was some kind of, good luck charm for them. If I turn up, the Boks are going to win and that kind of nonsense. And then the bad old years came in because I think we got rid of, Nick Mallet, and then we got Harry Yoon. They're really cool. It's one of those things, a lot of people look at the Harry Yoon years as almost as the bad years, but actually, if you look back at what he was trying to do, I remember that's the year when he brought back, where he brought these Australian guys to come in. I think Tim Lane was supposed to do the back line. Les Kiss, who's now going to coach Australia after all these years. The rugby league guy was going to do our defense. And then who was the kicking coach? It was Mick Byrne. He did kicking. He had an AFL background. And of course, if you remember Mick Byrne, he ended up with the All Blacks. And I think he won at least one or both, actually, the 2011 and 2015 World Cups with them as a coach. So obviously, the point I'm trying to make was Harry was trying to evolve the Boks. And, you remember, I don't know how old you were at the time. You remember the Argentina test where he told Percy Montgomery, who was playing at 10, not to kick, all game. And they didn't kick. And I think they only kicked like in the 77th minute or whatever it was. So he was trying to sort of get South Africa out of its head, which was, we play boring rugby. We play sort of almost like backwards rugby because, we'd emerged from isolation in the 90s. And he was trying to sort of move it forward. But he also made the terminal mistake of not sort of basing his evolution on South Africa's strengths, which is obviously a massive pack, which does the basics very well. The basics being the set piece, the line arcs, defending particularly well and kicking well as well. So it's one of those weird things that was a big sort of learning curve for me, in that you had a guy who kind of saw what South Africa needed as a rugby nation, but he got it wrong in his implementation. And that's essentially, if you really want to sort of make that long answer, where we could go through all the, the losses, the 53 threes at Twickenham, the 49 nils at Brisbane, the 52-16 at Ellis, not at Ellis Park, at Loftus Versfeld against the All Blacks. If you want to sort of contract that into a simple answer, which is Harry Sloan had the bright idea about what the Boks needed, but he went about it the wrong way in trying to implement it, i.e. he did base it on the right sort of foundation, i.e. the DNA blocks, if you want to call it that. That's essentially what Rassie Jacques has done, who ironically played in his last test and went on his last tour under Harry Sloan. That tour was 2001 when they went to when they ended up in the US for the very last game of the end of year tour. So I suspect Rassie learned an awful lot from that. He probably would have disapproved at the time, but I think he learned a lot from that. That there's nothing wrong in recognizing that South Africans do need to sort of get the rest of the free world has to offer us, but we mustn't forget what it is that makes us us. And that's essentially what Rassie has managed to put together. From a mental perspective, you mentioned that thing about us being underdogs. It's a South African thing. It's not necessarily just the rugby thing. We like to be underdogs so that we can prove people wrong. It's almost like we play to prove people wrong, as opposed to we play to prove ourselves right. And if you look at it, you look at it in your own life. If you're doing things to prove yourself right, I think that's a more sort of lasting motivation. Whereas if we just to prove people wrong, it works, but it's very short-lived or short-sighted. And essentially, so I think that's what we've been like for such a long time. And ironically now, I think the Boks have finally accepted it. I'll use a very recent example and say us against Japan this past weekend. The old Bok teams, expected to win against them, but with this weird sort of Brighton thing, that happened 10 years ago, might have sort of like played badly and not sort of like gotten through what they needed to get through from in that game, simply because the mentality wasn't quite where it should be. They went in there as favorites and they got the job done. They did the same against Argentina in the Rugby Championship this year and last year, having to play them in the last test, needing to win and being expected to be the team that wins. And I think under Rassie, that mentality has kind of we finally have sort of like a world champion mentality, simply because we do back ourselves now, which wasn't always the case if you think back to so many, Boks teams before.
No, I think I totally agree with you there. I think obviously Harry Viljoen, I was actually, funny story. I was back in the day. I don't even remember this player. Ashik Wise was a young scrum half back then. Yeah, brilliant player. I really rated him and looked up to him, even though he was shorter than me. But we were actually back then part of the Rising Stars program, which was implemented by SA Rugby. So you could spend a week with the Boks and see what it's looking like and how it was. I was actually there, and I still remember back then Harry Viljoen brought in all the fancy suits and all these type of things. There was lots going on. But it's great to see that I think we are today because of, there's a lot of Springbok coaches that tried different things. If you look at Carl du Plessis as well, Nick Mallet as well, I think they all played a unique part. It might be decades later, but coming back to the under, that's so true. I remember sometime when I started playing my career, we would play against New Zealand. I'm like, I'm not sure we're going to win this one. These guys they are really good, and even in Super Rugby. And only later, the Bulls, we started to back ourselves and we started to change that mindset and say, we got ourselves. But we got a lot of topics to talk about. I want to talk about the man behind the notepad. All right. Your words are so powerful. Even before social media came out, before things went viral, your words had massive weight and sometimes they would sting, but you're someone that has been very meticulous about your work, very well thought in terms of your articles. Tell me, being a sports writer, where did that journey start? Because you've been doing it for so long. So clearly you're passionate about what you do, and also in terms of when are key events coming on, the way you go about and approach it. Where did the journey start for you? Why become a journalist, a sports journalist, and especially focusing on rugby?
Yeah, look, journalism almost found me because essentially when I was 14, I moved to Dale College in King Williamstown. And that at the time was very much a rugby school. Most schools measure their success in a year by, the pass rate, like 100% pass rate. At Dell College at the time, we basically measured our success on the basis of, did we go unbeaten or not? Because it was a really, really good rugby school in the Eastern Cape. Our main competition being Selborne College and Queen's College. So anyway, I got into it, into the school. Didn't even play rugby because I was actually a very good cross country runner, and so and a cricketer. And so I'd play cricket in summer and cross country in the winter. But obviously, you had to support the rugby when the rugby was on. And the bug bit to the point where I think in my matric year, I finally gave up running in favor of playing for the 8th team, which is like literally the very last team in the school. and it was literally my, the best year of my schooling career. I mean, we lost probably every game but one. And yet, I was having a great year. So anyway, with journalism in grade 11, we went to Rhodes to kind of like, that whole career thing, check out what you're going to do. And, I was sitting there, I was going to do BCom at the time, trying to be a chartered accountant. And I went to it, I went to sort of a class where this guy broke it down for us. I was bored to tears. And then when we reconvened again, they said, look, they're looking for guys at the journalism class. And I just went literally to kill time. But I walked out of that feeling like, oh, this is what I want to do with my life. And I told the one teacher who actually laughed at me, which is quite interesting. I wonder if he's still around, because I did go back to the school like 10 years afterwards, and I was a sports writer. And guys were like, how are you writing rugby? You barely played the thing. How are you even out there? But anyway, that's kind of like basically how it happened. I probably should tell the stupid story of how I got introduced to rugby itself. As a new boy at Dell College, we had like a centenary. The school had a centenary, so we had all these schools visiting to come and play. And so obviously they still used sand to kick, because this is like the early 90s. And I think at the time they may have still been using the leather ball. I think that was last year.
You're giving away your age here.
Yeah, I don't think that. Well, then I get as a new boy, I get told, listen, you're gonna be a sand boy. You're gonna run sand on. So I look at this guy. I'm like, okay, but sir, how am I gonna know I need to run out to the field? And he looks at me. He says, oh, no. Listen, when the ref blows the whistle and he goes like this, which is the penalty signal, that's when you should come on. So first few times it worked like a charm. Every time the ref did that, I bombed onto the field, with a bucket full of sand. Oak would kick. But then, of course, it finally came. The team gets a penalty inside its own 22. And I just that last so lighty. So anyway, that's how I was introduced to rugby. And I've already told the story of how sort of I ended up doing journalism instead of chartered accounting. I must admit, I probably should have taken the other one because I make more money that side.
Jeez, you would have created me less headaches if you did that, if you went that route, man. Sim, it's kind of interesting. I've coached at La Rochelle for 4 years, and what was interesting to see, what they would actually host these full-on media days. So we would have this proper synthetic area covered with the roof, huge space, and everybody came in. And I would actually, it was funny enough when I'd actually developed great relationship with the journalist here in France, which was great. Sending message. And even when I finished up at La Rochelle, got some nice message, which was weird because they said like, hey, just want to say thanks. We had some great chats, really appreciate it. So I found, okay, that was actually quite great. And the club was very accommodating because they would actually organize everything, make sure that the journalists get their deadlines, that they get their stories, speak to the right players, which I felt was actually really well done and very professional. So I know back in the day, I don't know if things have changed, you told me. For you guys, it was tough. Yeah, man. I always, it's like we're talking today with the kicking game of the Boks, they're putting it up and they're just chasing that scraps. When that ball's on the ground, somebody needs to pouch on it. And I know at times it was tough for you guys as journalists to get access to the players, whether it's the Springboks or whether it's in the Super Rugby team, or now we look at the URC teams in the Champions Game. Has that changed? Is it a bit different? Are players a bit more accessible? How's that relationship between the journalists and the clubs at the moment?
Gus, it's actually quite strange. I almost feel like we've gone the other way around. You say now, you guys at La Rochelle had a more sort of open door policy for your media. I'll use an example from the 2007 World Cup. When you guys won, you invited us. It was this Paris hotel. I just can't remember. It
was in Bercy.
In Bercy, yes. And you guys invited us to come and sort of like drink with you in the team room. And I've got a picture from there, which is, I think, you, myself, and Ostiran, and sort of like mocking a scrum. Like the three of us, because like the front rows. And I think back then I would have weighed about 60 odd, like in terms of weight. So I didn't look like I belonged there. But that was it back then. You had sort of real relationships with the guys you wrote about. Now it's completely different because everything is so controlled that you don't really have proper relationships with the players. In rugby, you don't do one-on-one. You can't phone a player and talk to him in any of the franchises. And so all the contact that you have with the players is organized by the club, and the players themselves know not to respond to anything from you because, that's outside, that's outside of the lines. So in a strange way, we've probably gone the other way around where, when I was starting out, I remember Robbie Fleck bumming a cigarette off the journalists that were drinking at Newlands. In that there was a sort of a little media hall there, and they put a few beers for us after a game, and Flecky would wander in, bum a cigarette and chat with the Oaks and have a few drinks himself. So there was more access, ironically, in the old days, but actually now it's a lot limited. Look, I'm also much older than the players. I think the last time I was younger than a player that I covered would have been Percy Montgomery just after that 2007 World Cup. So after that, I've been older than all the players. I've been older than all the players since Monty retired. So I think maybe there's less scope to sort of have real relationships with the guys. Also, like maybe simply because they're just a different generation to what I am as well. But I must admit, from a sort of an establishment perspective, there's a lot. The control is a lot tighter in terms of who you talk to and how you talk to them. You might be lucky with maybe they've got a sponsorship thing of their own, and then they give you access due to that. But by and large, it's very heavily controlled. And the message, if you read on a typical week, if you look at this week, building up to the French test, if you have a look at all the media, guys, where they're writing, what they're writing, you'll see that it's roughly the same, simply because they got they all got the message from exactly the same source and at exactly the same time. And so it's very difficult to get that little room for maneuver. Whereas I think in the past, we got different stories out of you guys, even though we were writing about you, sort of, or specifically because we were writing about you individually. So yeah, I think that's actually what us. It's actually gone the other way around, which is quite interesting now that I think about it.
Yeah, I thought it would be different, seeing things event like, because I mean, if you look at things today, whether it's social media and all the online, how can I say, the platforms that are available, and it's important to have that relationship.
Sorry to interrupt you. The thing with social media is what it's done is that the players, I think, especially with written media, players don't trust written media enough because, and you probably felt like this when you played as well. There's always that feeling like, yes, I said it, but that's not how I meant it. It's kind of like been, whatever my message was or narrative was, has been misconstrued a little to represent something I didn't mean for it to be. And so a lot of guys believe that, with obviously the advent of social media, they can get their own accounts going and they can actually write, the truth in their own words instead of, having us sort of bend it as they kind of like tended to think in the past. And so I think it's actually another layer of why, there's a bit of a gap between reporters and their subject. It's the fact that, the subject actually has multiple platforms from which they can actually, do their thing, tell their own truth, even if sometimes it's a lie, because sometimes, those truths are actually a lie to somebody trying to get you to buy into, whatever they're selling. But, that's just how it works,
That's interesting. And you just opened up, I think yes, definitely. I agree with you. When I was a player, there were some times when I spoke to certain journalists, things would be portrayed a bit differently. But then there were like really journalists that I had a good relationship with and that like actually would write a really good article. But listen, at the end of the day, I also understood you got to sell. Back then was newspapers. You got to sell newspapers. You can't just give the boring stuff. You guys have got a job to do as well. But I think maybe to give people out there bigger insights in terms of what is the role of a sports journalist, especially if you look now in the modern day game. What is your role? What is your responsibilities, not just towards your employer or the people that you work with? What is it that you are trying? What is the picture that you are trying to paint for the public?
We basically a go between, between you and your favorite team, and our job is then to present your team as accurately as possible to you. If I'm writing a story, I'm writing it for you as the reader. This is what's happening with your team. This is why it's happening. Basically, the whole thing is about context. A journalist's job is to contextualize things. You see things a lot. You listen to Rassie talk, and you don't have a context of why is he talking like that? Where is it coming from? Our job is to give that context. So when I'm talking to Rassie, I'm talking to Rassie on behalf of the reader. And when I'm sort of writing for the reader, there's a small part that's also like kind of like doing it on behalf of Rassie as well. I have a duty to sort of be accurate, be accurate in my messaging of Rassie's message, because, we've already spoken about misconstruing people's, people's sentiments. And it's quite a tricky role, because it's not always constant if you think about it. And you're not always going to get it right. You're always going to let somebody down, because there's also us in the middle. There's a small part of us that writes for us. We see the game in a certain way. We think the game should be played in a certain way. And, it's not like we just conduits, that are just like in between, like, oh, he said this, and well, this is me telling you. You said, maybe in the old days, I used to say a match report. I used to say a good match report was a report where, even if you disagreed with me, you could take my points because my points were well reasoned. The irony now is, I don't think people need match reports as much as they used to, because there's so much analysis around the game already. So in the old days, the journal used to try and analyze as well. It wasn't actually your main role. Your main role was to tell the story, as it unfolded, the drama, what happened, how did it happen, why did it happen, who did what to influence that. But you also had to, some people, when they look at a rugby match, they need to know what the stats tell them. Some people need a nicely written story. Other people just want you to tell them what happened, and for you to get out of it. Be flowery, don't be this. And so you're trying to be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And you try to put that all, within, say, 800 words or even 1,000 words if your boss is being generous. But these days, in a super sports studio, there's about 4 or 5 hosts analyzing the same game immediately after. And you're writing something for somebody to see it maybe a couple of hours later, or even the next day. So you're kind of like sitting in a place of disadvantage in today's game, because there's not only those guys, pundits, analyzing, that many of them, and in the game, there's also these new guys that have come through the system, the Squidges of the world. I imagine a guy like you can do damage analyzing scrums on YouTube. This is nothing. What I know about scrums, I've never been in the game for 3-5 years, but what I know about scrums is still dangerous, because I've been there. And so you can break it down for the same kind of audience that's looking to me to kind of like have a sense of breaking it down. So it is a role that's changing, and your job is kind of becoming more and more to sort of, find what the others aren't doing. Where you've got an advantage is you've got time. You've got more time than the others do. So you can kind of like take a step back, and you can even make a couple of phone calls, and then you can put it all together. But obviously it takes time. When it does come through, it better be what you think it's going to be, because if it comes through and it still sounds like what the guys who were analyzing it sort of like for 15 minutes after the game, then people start thinking, oh, what do I need this guy for? What do I need the subscription for? So it is a role that has changed and is changing, simply because of the level of media that's out there, and the level of analysis that's kind of like grown, the sort of still formal analysis in the form of pundits. But there's also informal analysis in the form of guys like Squidge. That guy knows his, Squidge Rugby. He knows his rugby inside out. We go there to learn about the game. Like, okay, how does, you'll say, how did the Boks beat the All Blacks? And then you go there as a journal, having written, you've already written, but you go and read, and you're like, you go and check it out, and you're like, geez, I didn't notice this. I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that. I didn't know. So it's like life for all of us right now. We all caught up with, with information overload. And so as a journal today, you're also trying to pick a running line almost through all of that, in terms of like a running line that's going to make you as relevant as you were before. And it's a tough fight, and it's a daily fight. Whereas in the old days, you were the absolute authority, because they were just you and your competitors, and you were all kind of like the same. Now it's completely different. Remember how, when you were growing up, how many times you said it's in the newspaper as a way to end an argument. You can't end an argument like that and say, oh, it's on this website. No, people don't even believe in journalists anymore. It's like, I don't know what they're talking about. And sometimes they're right. We don't know what they're talking about. So it's quite a changing landscape. But it's like everything else, everything around us is changing. And ours is to adapt. Still writing things and people still read it, or I can't be doing it all that badly,
But it's interesting that you mentioned that. Obviously, I thought about doing some stuff on YouTube as well, but I'm kind of following a different approach. Is more because as a coach, I've realized that we are obsessed with performance. We got our metrics, we got our KPIs, we want to win games. And if we don't win games, you get fired. It's that simple here in France. There's already a few coaches that have been fired this season. And, the game is intense. Being a coach is intense. And you get so obsessed with players doing well. And when they're not performing, you're like, okay, he's not performing. Who else do I have in the squad? And instead of focusing on, like, listening, what can I do to help this player? How can I be better? How can I develop him? How can I amplify his strengths? And I realized that there are certain things that players today don't have, which we had back in the day. Having the guys like a John Smith, the Brian Abana, the Victor, that point of difference, that burning desire, that hunger. We see it clearly with the Boks because everybody wants to be a part of it. That's something different. But if we look at, in general, your professional rugby player that's not playing for his national team, and you sometimes find players a bit lackluster. They go through the motions, They go, like, it's fine. I'm getting paid. I'm getting my money. I can spend 5,000 euros going to the US, take a few Instagram photos, and I'm good. I'm happy. That's what a lot of players think like that. And maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. But that's why the stuff I start to share, whether it's on the podcast, on social media, is to try and educate. And recently I've been taking a lot of flack. I've been on this mission. I'm starting to identify all the cheat codes in scrummaging. I'm starting to publish it. I'm saying, you call it, listen here, you call it dark arts. I said, that's just plain cheating. I'm like, stop. And I call players out, tell it, stop. Do you feel proud when you get a pat on the back because you got a penalty because you cheated? Shame on you. I'm always saying that. And a lot of props said me, gee, why are you sharing the secrets? Don't do this. I'm like, dude, do things right. Work hard. Work on your strength, work on your agility, work on your power. And recently I got interviewed by one of your colleagues, and the headline of it article, like I said, the Boks don't have to cheat when it comes to scrummaging. It's that simple. And maybe there might be the odd behavior here and there. It's not always perfect. But it's crazy. I put this video on and got like, don't know how many 100,000 of views and comments. And there were great comments. Refs thanking me. Thanks for identifying this. And others was like, why are you sharing this? I said, listen, guys, I'm looking at the bigger picture. We want the scrum to remain part of the game. And I'll be honest with you, as a scrum specialist and someone who wants to evolve as a coach, and I want that set piece to remain part of it, if we're going to continue on this trend, it's going to be taken out. And I mean, let's be honest, when a scrum happens, like, unless it's two teams that really want to have a full go at it, it's like, man, it's like a lucky packet. You don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get the sweets that you like, sometimes you get the toy which you don't really need. But
yeah.
That is how it's going. But yeah, I do believe these platforms, it's great. Even myself, I like watching, the YouTube channel of Egg Chase as well. His insights, the way he debriefs games, it's great. And I do agree with you. I have a question for you.
But that's the thing though, Gurthro. Like for me, when I was growing up, or when I started in the industry, the whole point is to heighten the level of conversation around the game. What are we talking about? I used to find, and I still find, if your best place to check if everyone that's kind of like talking about the game, whose job it is to talk about the game, is doing the right job, is to walk into the nearest pub and listen to the debates that the Oaks are having when they're watching a game. And too often it's just bog standard sort of uninformed stuff that's just repetition of, what guys heard somewhere else, lazy stereotypes about certain players. And, the player used to, let's say Cheslin Colby in the old days when he was perceived as a guy that couldn't tackle because he was too small and he wasn't going to play for the Boks. Sometimes you've got people that are still stuck there he's a small guy, he shouldn't be playing. And so what I'm saying is the really good thing about guys like you coming into it and sort of challenging guys like us who are, our information is very much secondhand, whereas yours is firsthand. So having guys like you coming in and challenging us to kind of like make our secondhand information good secondhand information instead of just secondhand information, which is, you're just repeating something you heard somewhere. I like that dynamic where you've got the guy I bump into at the pub. It doesn't have to just listen to what I heard from somebody within rugby, but he has actually watched you on YouTube and made up his own mind, because now suddenly the chat we're having is a very good one, because I'm like, yeah, but so-and-so told me this, but I actually think this, and this guy's like, well, I was watching Gurthro and this is what I think. That's a four-way conversation already between two guys. And that's the level of conversation we need to be having in rugby, because too often it's just not good enough, especially at a pub. And I think I keep calling the pub because I think that's the best place to go, because that's where your target market almost is. Those are your guys. And so, yeah, I appreciate having guys like you around, because then it asks questions of me in terms of, I mustn't just be lazy and assume that everyone thinks they have to listen to what I've written simply because I've done it for 25 years. Therefore, I must know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean?
No, it's the same for me as a coach. I share a lot of stuff. Like I've got this online community, and it's on a platform called School. And it's funny. I'm not just sharing rugby tips. I'm sharing scrum tips. It's rugby tips. It's mindset, how to bounce back from poor performance. This is what I experienced as a player. This is what I did. And then people like, but you're giving away this for free. Why are you doing this? Like, listen, I want to give back. Yes, I do have other courses and stuff like that, but I'm really enjoying this. I've actually managed to create a full-on community where people have developed full-on relationships, meaning they actually care, they invested. We got a player that's from Kenya. He told us this unbelievable story. This is awesome, and players don't realize this. They went on a 3.5-hour bus ride, and they arrived at 2 a.m. the morning. And it doesn't have all the means and everything the luxury. On the bus ride, and it's dangerous where they're going. And arrived at 2 a.m. and they only had 14 players in their squad against 23. And a lot of the other players didn't want to go because it was too far. There were some issues in the club, blah, blah, blah. And he said they got there, but the ref warned them, if you guys have too many injuries, I'm going to stop the game. So they played 14 against 23, and they actually led the first half for 30 points to 16 or something like that. Then obviously they got tired, and the guys came back. And then eventually they won that game. It was 36, 26 or something like that. I'm like, wow, that's insane. 14 against 23. If you think now about the bomb squad. And he shared the story with the community and with all these coaches. Some of them were professional, semi-professional, amateur, and they're like, well done, it's great. And I think people don't realize that we are here to help each other and inspire each other. But the point I'm trying to make is that when I put stuff out there, I have to constantly learn. I can't just stay in my comfort zone and I tell them, listen, yeah, I'm no guru. Like even something which is happening now, and another coach, we're looking at how we can use AI to help analyze the scrum. We're starting to explore that. Like crazy stuff. Listen, I'm going on another trend there.
Listen, you can't do that to Dan, eh?
Dan AI.
Exactly. So
I'll help Don develop it. He can package it. He'll make loads of money. He can just give me a little commission.
What does a Dan found look like, in an AI situation? You know what I mean? Because guys have to go to the farm and get it sorted,
Sam, we've still got a few topics to cover, and I wanted to ask you this question, just coming back to, because you're quite knowledgeable when it comes to the history of the game, especially South African rugby. But we've been grateful, or we've been privileged. We've won 2 back-to-back World Cups. But is there any common trends that you've seen over the last few years? One, before these 2 World Cups, was one of the reasons we couldn't always get back into it. 2011, we fell out of it in the quarterfinals. 2015, we bounced back in 2019 and 2023. But were there any common trends that you felt that were the reason we didn't always perform? And what would you say are the trends we need to be careful for going forward?
Well, I think if you want to look back at why we couldn't always back it up, we couldn't always back up those performances. The first obvious one was that we always changed the coach. Obviously, look, I mean, in 95, you can't, Kitch Christie, I think he got ill afterwards and he was replaced by Andre Malgraaf. And then, you kind of like, then you move on to 2007. Remember, Jake with you guys, won a World Cup, couldn't keep him his job, and he was replaced by Peter de Villiers. And so I think the very first and obvious one is, if you've got someone who's gotten it together, he's gotten it together enough to win a World Cup, you might want to tap into that IP, But in South Africa, we don't. We just want to change him and move on to the next guy who then starts a whole new thing, which may or may not work. And I think that was the first sort of thing. It was that lack of sort of continuity and consistency in terms of, your vision. When you then look at, guys like, what Rassie and them have, there's been one constant thing. When they arrived in 2018, he and Jacques basically said, we are here to A, win rugby matches, B, transform, and C, grow depth, in that order. And what they've tried to do at all times is to make sure that at all times they're trying to win rugby matches, and at the same time they're trying to transform the team. And thirdly, they're also trying to they're trying to make sure that they're growing depth, which then would explain to you why we played over 50 players last year. And I think we are around there already in terms of the players that we've introduced to, that we've given caps to this year again. So I just think a lot of people don't understand. I remember years ago, just to bring it back to the transformation thing, because I imagine it's something you and I, are particularly interested in, especially with our involvement in the game. A lot of people have always kind of thought transformation is an optional extra. It's something you do when, I don't know, when everything is great, when everything's fine. You then it's a luxury that, you can now go, oh, can I get these black players in? The thing about transformation has been so short-sighted from one perspective, which is the vast majority of people in this country are black. And so when you choose to sort of like base your team on the minority population, the sport has always worked on the basis of the more options you have, the better you are going to be. So if you open your doors wide to transformation, it goes to follow then that you're going to get more and more people who can play. And the more people you get who can play, the more competition you get. It's just like being in India and playing cricket. 1.3 billion people are obsessed with the game, which basically means when you put 11 of them on a field, there have been so many battles that have been fought, so many wars that have been fought for just that one guy. That one guy has seen off, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of other guys trying to play that one role. So I never understood. I remember your old coach, Anneke Meyer, sort of complaining to Steve Hansen, kind of like along the lines, well, Steve Hansen said that's what he said to him, along the lines of, he was being made to pick, black players, which, it's a narrative that's well worn in South African rugby. Oh, you have to pick X amount of black players. But my thing was, how can you feel like your hands are being tied behind your back by being asked to tap into more of the population instead of, just working with, I think at the time, the white population in the country would have been about, I don't know, 8 to 10%. Why would you only want to tap into 10% of the population instead of going as far as you possibly can into the rest of it, looking for your talent? That's what guys like Rassie have decided to do. And they sort of stopped making it a stigma. That I remember asking him, when you become a Springbok coach, there are basic questions you get asked. One is, are you going to win the next World Cup? And 2, what do you want to get judged on? Which is usually Springbok wins. And the third one is, what are you going to do with this transformation thing? And the way you're asking it, you're basically saying, what are you going to do with this problem? And Rassie was just like, no. We've got the players. They just need to play under pressure, under the right kind of pressure. I.e., at the time, we still had Super Rugby. It was like, they need to play Super Rugby. And if they're playing Super Rugby regularly, we don't have a problem, because then they come and play for us, and we're going to put them under similar sort of test match pressure to make sure that they develop as players. But make no mistake, we've got the players. And it was such a slightly different approach, but it was, in terms of the results, it was huge results, simply because you've kind of like opened yourself up to tap into all the talent that's available to you, instead of, just the talent that you wish, was available to you. That's why, and also transformation stopped being a numbers thing with these guys, where they went, it's not about how many black guys you've got in your team. It's, maybe how many of them are playing important roles. Is one of them your captain? Is one of them Lukhanyo who's a genius? Is, what I mean? We kind of changed it into the kind of player you have. Or you look at Marazole Mapimpi and you go, okay, under normal Springbok circumstances, would this guy have any kind of chance of making it as a Springbok? And the answer is no, but he's made it. The fact that he has made it then means that is transformation, because you have got a guy now that's from a place where nobody's ever heard of a Springbok from before. And what happens is there are now kids from that place who, when they find out that, oh no, this guy, grew up in the same place that I grew up in, because it doesn't matter what you do in life, people need to see somebody from where they are to be able to believing for themselves that, hang on, wait, maybe I can do it too. So now you've got loads of young black kids running around saying, Sia Kolisi could grow up in Sweden in abject poverty and become a Springbok captain. Guess what? I could do that too. And then he started to work on that dream. If Mapimpi can make it as far as he has, can be on the brink of, 50 test caps, and have scored South Africa's first ever try at a World Cup final, then maybe I could do that too. And then again, you get another kid that looks at Sasha and goes, if Sasha could play 10 for the Boks, geez, maybe I can play 10 for the Boks too. Those are important sort of positions. Those are significant positions. And you will get a black African coach at some stage. And then again, coaches will turn around and be like, you know what? If those guys can make it, then so can we. I think, the reason the Boks are able to sort of repeat so much, it's almost, everything they do has almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the basic sort of building blocks of what they do is they go out to win matches every weekend they play. That's the first thing. The second one is they go out to transform every weekend. They've got the players, and they go out to build their depth every time, every single season. And with those three things, if you constantly trying to feed those three things, it kind of like feeds back into the system, in that, it feeds excellence into the system almost in a way that, you're not even thinking about, but it's happening behind the scenes almost organically. So I think that's the big sort of reason that these guys, are are able to sort of go back to back in so many points, back to back World Cup, back to back rugby championships now. Also, what Rassie's done particularly beautiful. I think he's been around for 7 years now. He's gotten different voices within the team. You need those voices because it doesn't matter how emotional you are or you can sound like Rassie has in Chasing the Sun, or it doesn't matter how sort of like, scared the guys are of you, because you can tell them off, and all the shortcuts that they take mentally. It doesn't matter what a motivator you are, which Rassie is. At some stage, they've heard everything you've got to say, so they need to hear it from somebody different. And the inclusion of guys like Tony Brown and Felix, coming and going, Andy Edwards. It's just different voices and small little different things, trying different things. I think that's what's kept, the Boks going forward, instead of kind of like stagnating and then everyone catching up with them at once, as was the case, before.
I think what you're mentioning there is actually very important. We're actually starting to use all our resources, which is available now, to develop the game, because I actually just finished watching the Japan game, because for some reason Canal Plus didn't put the South African game. So first I was very highly upset about that, because I actually had to go buy a mattress for my daughter who was stuck in traffic.
Which is weird, because they've just bought SuperSport or MultiChoice. Yeah, so actually, if South African games should be shown anyway, it should be.
No, they're showing it, but they chose to show the Australia-England game. I'm like, you want to watch the Boks? Come on. So I was a bit angry, but anyway, I caught up on this morning, and we can have our arguments whether opposition was good enough and all these type of things. But what I saw was that just the style of rugby, like you mentioned it earlier, you got to build it on the foundation, on your strengths, and that we're still doing. We still have that dominance. We still trying to go hard. You guys like Jasper Visser's running hard, and Malcolm Marx. But then I was like watching Sasha play, and I was like, it's like watching Dan Carter on steroids, or where Dan Carter and Andre Pollard, had a kid together or something like that. That doesn't sound right, but you know where I'm getting at. So he's got that tactical ability, he's got the kicking game. And when I look him, like the try he scored, that's something that Dan Carter would have done. That little half gaps, he push himself through, he finds a way, stumbling, but he keeps on going. And that's amazing. I'm excited for South African rugby, because we talk about transformation, because now we're starting to discover we have access to players that have a unique skill set, which we didn't have available before. So now actually you can play to all your strengths. Yeah. It doesn't mean just the classic dominant kicking game, bashing. We got the players now that can do it. You got guys like Kirtley, you got Cheslin, obviously, but loads of other players coming through. And I'm super excited to see where this is going. And that's going to lead up to our next one. We got the big one coming up this weekend. All right. And I can tell you this, for months, I wasn't even allowed to smile in France because I was smiling. They said I would just be rubbing it. But to be in all fairness, for 2 years before the World Cup in 2023, I was taking flack. Like, I was being told South Africa is not going to make it. France is going to win this World Cup. It's theirs. They're the number one team in the world. And I always would reply to them and say, guys, I don't know how to explain this, but we're just different. It's not about tactics. It's not about tactics and all. We're just different. And it's actually mentioned, I had recently had Conrad Smith on the podcast, and he actually mentioned the one thing where the All Blacks switched and changed, like for South Africans, the World Cup is very important. They changed that dynamic, that back-to-back World Cups in 2011, 2015. So I can tell you this first-hand experience. This nation was bruised when the French team got kicked out of the World Cup. And players were in depression, full-on depression. Some of them even talk about it publicly, and I could see how the performance. So this is going to be an interesting one, because I know for some players still losing that World Cup, it was probably like the worst experience. What are your thoughts on the game coming up this weekend? After watching the Boks recently, this is a tricky one.
Yeah, look, obviously, I mean, even as a South African down here, we are aware of what happened. I remember watching France in the 2024 Six Nations, and they were just vacant. They weren't there at all, and just going through the motions. I mean, I happen to I look at the depth that the French have. I look at the size, the sheer size of the players that they have, and it's literally the one country you look at and you think they are probably the nearest to matching, to matching what the Boks have in terms of just that depth and just that size and also just that aggression and very well coached as well, by someone like Fabien Galtier. I think I've looked at that, and you look at the fact that, I don't even know what was the score in the 2022 test where Peter Steph du Toit was sent off after 12 minutes. What was it like? The French won by about 4 points, wasn't it? I think it was 4 points.
It was a close game, yeah.
Yeah, it was a very close game. And then obviously the next one was won by a point. So obviously there's very little to separate these two teams. And now suddenly, the French get to have their opportunity for revenge. It's quite a weird one. I know we put a lot of stock by what happens in this game, but in the greater scheme of things, is it really that important? Given that, what it means, it's not like somebody's going to go home afterwards. If the Boks lose to France, it's like, well, it's France. What do you expect? If they lose to the Boks, pretty much the same response back. So I actually don't think there is as much at stake as we all would like to make it. But I think from the perspective of rugby fans, actually we'd like to see it happen again just because of the quality of a game. That game is still the best thing I've seen on a rugby field since when? I'm trying to go back. Oh, I can't even. Maybe you remember the old, in the early 2000s when Australia would be playing against New Zealand, with guys like John Eales and them, those Brumbies boys against Tana Umaga and them. Back then when, Christian Cullen and them were still playing, that game was the best thing I'd seen on a rugby field.
Get up at 4 a.m. to watch that games.
Yeah, exactly. Probably, that's the best game I've seen probably since back then.
Yeah.
And you'd be silly to not want to see it again. It's been 2 years, the French have been simmering, the Boks have been succeeding elsewhere. What you really want to do is to see how it goes. I'm obviously, a bit disappointed by all the talk about the injuries. There is there's no DuPont. I see now there's no Jalibert. There's no Jalibert to be run over by Eben Etzebeth to score that try. There's no Thomas Ramos. There's no Thomas Ramos to be charged down by Jasmine Colby. So much of the history that happened, that was built in one game alone because of just how insane it was. The tempo, the physicality, the speed at which, the intensity at which they played. It's still etched in our minds. I think in terms of the result itself, there's nothing to gain. But in terms of the entertainment itself, there's so much to look forward to because those, for me, are easily two of the best rugby teams in the world, if not the best rugby teams in the world. Obviously, there'll always be Ireland, there'll always be New Zealand, probably the other way around order-wise. But you look at the teams right here, right now, I think, I really look forward to it. I'm a bit disappointed about, the guys that are missing, obviously we'll be missing Ox and Chair. I still don't know who Rassie's going to try and get around that. Sounds like he's going to move, he's probably going to move Thomas to Lucid. And then I'm not sure what he's going to do with, with the tight end side because, I think there's no more Vincent Koch in the squad. And so it'll be interesting to see how he sort of shuffles his pack to be able to. Boks look a bit more solid in terms of their preparation, or simply in terms of how much less players they're missing. But by the same token, you don't have to. The question you have to ask is, the French players, are they sort of fresh to the point of underdone? In terms of having played, test rugby together, or are we sort of battle hardened to the point of battle weary because we've been playing so much rugby already? So I think it's those kind of two things colliding, and then we'll we'll know the answer around about midnight on Saturday night.
No, I think you make some valid points there. I think the thing that makes me a bit hesitant for this game, I do believe the Boks are way more battle ready, which is normal, coming off the rugby championship, which was unbelievable. Firstly, as a spectator watching that, we didn't know who was going to win that one. It was unbelievable. And I'm liking the excitement we're starting to see now in international rugby. Like you just said there, if the French win, okay, it's kind of normal. If the Boks win, it's kind of normal. It's great to see that. But I do believe, a lot of these players have been playing club rugby, top 14. So, where stakes are high. So I definitely, from a pressure point of view, that would have definitely helped and prepped him. But it's going to be injury. You just mentioned there is some injuries, unfortunately. I do believe Ramos will be available. He just became a father recently. So that was the reason he wasn't involved, because he did play this weekend for Toulouse, yeah. And Aldred should be back as well. So, yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see if Dupont was there as well. But Roman Intermac is back on form. He's playing some of his best rugby. That's a player that just shows sometimes for years he was up there and a few injuries. And it's going to be interesting because he's on good form and the backs of the French are electric. But listen, enough about the French and the Boks, because before we run out of time here, because this is about you. As a journalist, what I would like to know is, because, we've spoken about how things have evolved, all the different media platforms, and does the written word still have a massive importance compared to online media, all those type of things, and the social trends that players are now following. What would you say were one of the key habits that you followed as a journalist that allowed you to, because you've been consistent for 25 years, and I hope you're going to be consistent for another 25. If you look at Gary Player, just celebrated his 90th birthday. So, he's still going strong. So what would you say as a journalist? And this is not just for future journalists out there, but to anyone in general, in terms of what were the habits that you had that allowed you to be so consistent and remain passionate about your work and really put in your blood, sweat, and tears into everything that you're doing?
I forgot, it's like everything else. Liking something or loving something that will look after you on the difficult days. That. The days when you don't want to get up, just knowing that it's for something I love, kind of like gets you back and going again. Obviously, it's like any other relationship. There are days when you just like, I'd much rather not be taking cuck from players, from officials, administrators, and stuff like that, or readers these days, because like a lot of the readers hate our guts sometimes in terms of how stupid they think we are, which is sometimes fair enough and sometimes unfair. But anyway, first things first, you've got to love what it is that you do. Secondly, you can't forget who you represent. At the end of the day, your audience is who you represent. And so, whenever you are working in the middle of whatever it is that you're trying to do, you have to go back to whose side am I on? And the only side you're on is the reader, or I don't know if you're in broadcast, your viewers, etc. So don't forget whose side you're on or who you're doing it for. And then I probably would say that the third thing is, especially in journalism, there's so much narrative being peddled around these days. Especially with private accounts, people can get their own truth out, which is not necessarily the truth sometimes. Your job is to kind of like be on the side of truth, which is a difficult thing, because I've always said it to guys, like sources. Yes, sources, that a big part of why sources are willing to talk to you and tell you something is because they too have an axe to grind with somebody else. And so, what you get from your own source sometimes is a narrative, and you take it to be the truth because it's coming from someone you trust. So you still need to sort of, get to the bottom of all of them and kind of like work out what to you is a version of the truth. So I would say those are the things you've got to be sort of consistent at. And obviously, actually, the irony is that you've got to be consistent at consistency itself. You you got to keep doing the right things over and over and over again. You must talk to people. I said earlier, everything is a people business. You still need to pick up the phone. I see a lot of youngsters doing the job now. All they do is, it's guys I've never met. Guys who basically stay in their offices, and all they do is they read what everybody else writes, and they come up with their own sort of their own analysis of of what they think that is. But they don't, they've never phoned someone. They can't, if something happens with John Dobson, they can't call him and say to him, "Hey, what's the real story here?" That too many of the youngsters are not building those relationships. And all they're doing is they're just trusting that they have a platform, and as long as they have something controversial enough to say, people will flock to it, which sometimes works, but it's obviously not based on a firm foundation. You still need to phone people, you still need to visit people, turn up at at Loftus B Field, because if you don't turn up at Loftus B Field, you do not meet the disgruntled players in the parking. Who will tell you everything you need to know.
You were consistent. You were consistent in being consistent. You were there every week.
Got it sorted up, man. You get it sorted out. It's just like,
And listen, yes, obviously you followed my career. Is there anything that you can share with the audience? Anything that comes to mind? There's a lot. Keep it PG.
No, I remember that chat you and I had at Bercy, that hotel, when you guys were celebrating, because obviously you'd been, did you even play in the final? You didn't, eh?
No, I didn't. I started all the test matches in the build-up to the final against England. And obviously when the World Cup came, obviously I understand that, being a coach now, understand why that was done, but when you were young.
Yeah. So I remember the chat we were having.
Yeah.
I remember the chat we were having with you. I was, we were supposed to be having a private sort of chat, just like, I was probably consoling you about, geez, so to pity you couldn't get on the field and whatnot.
Yeah.
And Os, who I got the impression was a bit of a mentor to you, kind of snuck into the conversation. And
I remember that, yeah.
And he looked at both of us and he said, "Hey, John, you need to back yourself a bit more.
Yeah.
You need to, because Os's big thing before was that the easiest way to find yourself a spot on the bench was to be versatile. So Os probably wouldn't play for Rassie these days, but that's a story for another day." Essentially, what I'm trying to say is, from that year onwards, that the main growth in you as a player was that you kind of like, you acted like a starter and not a squad member. And I felt a fair bit of that came from that conversation, and maybe the disappointment of not having played in the final, having been involved all the way through. So I mean, it is PG.
No, but it's so true. I talk about that a lot. For me, there was that one moment after the game where I obviously was disappointed, but then realized, what we just did. We all have a role to play. Not everybody can always be in that finals. The same with the Boks we see today. There are a lot of players that have been disappointed in 2019, but it's bigger than you. It's not about you. And I think that's the most important. But we all got our own journey. We're running our own race. It led to so many great things. And we're fortunate and privileged to have been a part of in the years that came after that. But what Os said there was, where you got to back yourself. At some stage, and I work with a lot of players, and especially the new generation, they have a lot of what they have this negative voice in their head. They have a bad scrum session, and then it impacts their game, it impacts their ultra, and they get into their own head. At the end of the day, you just got to back yourself. But talking about backing yourself, is there something that you can share with your audience in your career as a journalist where it was a tricky time? Is there any challenges that you faced as a journalist where you've thought, listen, it's going to be tough to overcome this, or as a human being, anything you can just showing the other side of some without these notes?
No, look, that's generally life itself, man. So in 2016, I I was in management at work. Actually, a job I felt I was doing quite well, but I basically fell out with the company I was working with in terms of the vision and the values they had sort of going forward. I'd sort of assumed my role was to grow people in that position that I was holding, and suddenly I was sitting at a place where I was going to have to say no to people simply because the bottom had fallen out of the industry, which this is the journalism or media industry. Because money is just not the same as it used to be when I first arrived. So I kind of sat there and I thought, I thought I was going to be growing people, but now I'm going to be telling them, I'm going to be telling them no all the time, which basically would translate into not growing them. And so I figured, what, maybe it's best that I leave and I become a freelancer, just go on my own all over again. And so I thought I'd struck deals, but I hadn't, with people I trusted before I left. And I then realized that, that hadn't happened, that because it wasn't done in writing and it wasn't signed, it hadn't happened. And it led to like a 7-year period where I'm not lying to you. It was so difficult because, you're almost 40, you're about 40. And then, suddenly you don't have, you're starting to lose things. I was making so little money. I was working for people who actually, as a freelancer for them, just didn't care about my well-being. And I remember writing this one guy an email and saying to him, look, man, this deal that we struck, it's killing me. It's not working for me. It's losing me things. It's going to lose me my house back home. It's going to lose my car, and it's going to lose me my relationship with my then fiance. 3 things which came to fruition, all 3 of them. And I remember the one big thing I remember from all of that, writing that email, was that the guy never even got back to me. There was no acknowledgement of receipt. He listened to him, lied to me, say, listen, we're going to talk about it. There was just nothing. There was no acknowledgement of the whole thing. And so it was 7 harrowing years of just not making enough money. And you've got a kid, and because you're not together with the mother, when you're not able to pay, it's a bigger issue because of, it's child support that you're now not paying. And so it was a very difficult period where, I remember when I got this current job, and I was sitting there thinking, I could get evicted at the end of this month if I don't get this job that I interviewed for. So, look, as you know, Gurthro, there isn't one person on this planet who hasn't gone through a period like that. And all of us do. And it's a proper test of, what you're about. It's a proper test of how much you want what it is that you say you want. And it's a proper test of your skills sometimes. Can you handle your skills under pressure? And, I'm still here. Life is solid. It's stable. We good, I've got a youngster who's 11. He's thriving where he goes to school, 100% in his life, which is actually the more important things. It's much more important than all the other stuff that we think is important. So yeah, I'm pretty sure if I asked you longer than how much, you would tell a similar story about yourself. And those are all questions where, we need to answer for ourselves. And sometimes the best way to answer those questions is by hanging tough. Sometimes the best you can do is just hang in there, No, I don't necessarily think I did anything magical to get out of it. I just stayed in the fight, and eventually I just kind of squeaked over the line, you know what I mean?
I was just about to say exactly the same thing. Just stay in the fight, that's it. And I've said it so, and it's so true. We can be different, but at some stage we all face these challenges in life. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, you just mentioned it, to resume to our audience about how bad you want it. And, it's just about staying in that fight, just going at it, being consistent, and reminding yourself but this has been unbelievable. There's so many things that we didn't touch base on, but I want to finish this off because I think you follow a lot of youngsters. And I would just like to get your point of view. We didn't even touch base on Sia, but if I open that can of worms now, we're going to be here for another 30 minutes. But I want to come back to Sasha. You know, I'm assuming you follow them as a youngster, and like obviously now everybody's talking about it. And I got to meet him in the summer, or our summer, your guys' winter, this year. And what an unbelievable youngster! He's very humble, you know, very respectful. But that doesn't happen by chance in my mind. Yes, you might have the talent or the skill and stuff. What would you say from your point of view? And I don't want a coach's point of view. I want your point of view. Is the reason why he's performing the way he's performing right now? Obviously, he's in a great setup, but we've really seen him level up. And is there something that you can share with us from his schoolboy days that potentially you already saw glimpses of this? Why we are seeing this not final result, but this amazing style of rugby, which is playing the ability to alternate, attack, kick. He's doing it all at the moment.
I think with Sasha, the important thing is maybe his background. Sasha's story is a classical new South African story, which is one of his parents being born in exile, and his other parent being an activist locally, and a lawyer, from what I understand. This is his mum. And so you've got, and one of the great things they could have done for him was take him to a school like Bishop's. There's that old joke about how do you know a guy went to Bishop's. He'll tell you because they're quite, they like, every guy I've ever met from Bishop's is a very confident man. And so like Sasha is no different. So I think they found the right place to have for a kid with that kind of history / background. And I remember speaking to his high school coach, a guy called Wes Chetty. Wes says he was called when he was at Bishop's. He was called to Bishop's prep. Basically, somebody said to him, "Do you need to come down here and take a look at the next Herschel Gibbs?" So obviously they had Sasha, who could play rugby, who could play soccer, who could play cricket. One of those guys, just like whatever environment you put him in, he was thriving. So I think his environment that he was, sort of thrust into helped. And in that, the big thing about rugby at Bishop's was always that they encouraged you to have a go. So suddenly you had a player with all those gifts who nobody actually tried to sort of to rein in. Instead, they just kind of like kept encouraging him to be himself. And as a result, that's what spilled over into the Boks team. And also, I mean, he's a guy that was spotted so early by everyone. And Sasha's one of those talents where it doesn't matter who you are. All you had to do was see him play once, and you were like, okay, cool, this guy, all things being equal, will play for South Africa. Same thing happened with me. I remember bumping into his godfather. He said to me, "Are you still involved in sport?" I said, yeah. He says, my godson is a good rugby player. And he says, his name is Sasha Feinberg-Mngomezulu. I'm like, yeah, no. This was like a good 3 years ago. And I said, no, he'll be a Springbok, and a really good one. And all equal, he'll play 100 test matches for South Africa. It's not because I had particular insights into him. It's just, you can see it sometimes, So once they discovered Sasha Feinberg-Mngomezulu, they're just lying to you, and they're lying to themselves, because some talents are just obvious. But the really cool thing about him is what you said already. He's actually a humble guy. So he sort of straddles that difficult line of and a lot of people, because he's so confident, they think he's arrogant. But I think he's just confident with a swagger, and people can't. He's confident and therefore arrogant, which is not true. And I understand at the Stormers, he's already spoken to the coaches, and he's listen, if ever you feel like I'm getting ahead of myself, please, by all means, pull me aside, sit me down, and get it done. And so he's and obviously you can tell because he's led wherever he's played, and he's done well wherever he's played. A lot of people, like you can tell that he's a leader, not only of himself but potentially of others. He is something we've never seen in this country. Rugby people in South Africa, if you show that level of confidence, the W word comes out. They say
the W.
The W word. He is not Wimhut, and he's nothing we've seen. And also he's a young black fly-off, playing in South Africa, a place where the fly-off has always been reserved for the white players, like almost the head prefects, if you want to call it that. And he's unapologetic, and a lot of people, too many people don't know how to deal with that, which I think is a pity, because he's just a confident guy with ability. Everything he's been confident about, he has backed. And the thing about Sasha Feinberg-Mngomezulu is everyone that wants him to kind of like wind his neck in a little bit must understand that if you take away his instinct to have a go, to try something, whenever he wants to try something, you're not getting the same player. And so whatever you're excited about him, you have to also be excited about his willingness to have a go all the time, or his confidence, which can come across as arrogance. And so he's gonna take a lot. The biggest adjustment with Sasha Feinberg-Mngomezulu is gonna be made by the public, as opposed to made by the guys within the Boks setup. Because Rassie is an ex-player, he knows the signs of a guy who's been hurt, and you can see Sasha's been handled already. When he came in at first, he thought he was gonna start playing, and he wasn't playing, and you could tell, it's like, oh shit, that means I need to work here. He's getting it, and they're developing him, and they're working hard at making sure that maybe he is that starting sort of for the 2027 World Cup that we all think he should and probably is. But look, I mean, it's going to be an interesting ride to watch, because I don't think we've had a talent like that ever.
No, for sure. But for all the older generation in South Africa, they will know this from a famous movie. It's like, that man cannot be Nasbutter because he's clearly running with the ball.
Incidentally, Nitz loves him as well. We spoke to him the one time on the podcast, and he absolutely loves Sasha.
But I remember actually when I spent some time, and I was very grateful that the Boks allowed me to spend some time with them, just to learn from them as well as a coach. And I was really impressed the way he spoke, the confidence and that leadership came through. And I was like, wow. And I'm not even talking about rugby, just from a point of view. And I can tell you this, very respectful, very humble, but just having that confidence. And, you see it in his game, like even look at the try that he scored where he kicked up and under. You're like, what is he doing? You're like, and he chased it. He backed it. He got it back, scored, done and dusted. But listen, Sim, it's been unbelievable. I felt there's so much more we could have gone into. Maybe I need to come back and we can talk about the good old days a bit more. But it was unbelievable having you on this podcast. And, it was great for me is that, people also need to understand that everybody's a human being, irrespective of their job. They're doing what they are passionate about. We might not always agree with them, but we can have mutual respect. And I think that's the end of the day. And I hope that things will evolve for you guys, getting back to those one-on-ones with the rugby players. Is there anything you would like to share with us before we sign off, a message in particular for anybody in South Africa, with the build-up leading to the test matches, or anything in general you'd like to add before we sign off?
Geez, I've spoken for an hour and a half. Usually, I'm usually the one doing all the questioning. So, I'm pretty talked out at the moment.
No, awesome. No, thanks for that. But what I will be doing is just mentioning to the audience as well. We just recently saw that there's a 4 test match series coming with the All Blacks next year. So I'm working with scientists and professionals to see how we can help supporters manage the mental load of those games and also prepare physically and mentally, because I don't know, I'm going to get through. The World Cup in 2023 was too much for me. I was emotionally drained after that World Cup. So 4 test matches against the Abs, the greatest rivalry in history. I don't know if we're going to do that, but we potentially might do a pod with yourself and Kola, and we talk about that a bit and see how we can prepare.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
Thanks, my man. Thanks for taking time for joining us. And for all our listeners, if you enjoyed our show, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Help me to grow the show as well. And once again, thanks to Sim for joining us today. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.